Hi, and welcome to the Fancy Comma YouTube channel. It's been quite a busy summer. I've been doing a bunch of different stuff, and I haven't really been at my computer for most of it, honestly, because I'm kind of tired of looking at my computer because I spent this time last year tutoring almost full time while also working on all of Fancy Comma's different resources and getting into recording different YouTubes and learning how to edit YouTube. So this year I've scaled back a lot and I'm focused on quality over quantity. And I've been doing fun stuff and having quote unquote real life experiences out in the real world. So um, I made a list of everything I have done this summer. So one thing I did is I recorded a video interview with Santiago of Ivory Embassy, and I'm going to link that in the description box. So make sure to check that out. And I also worked on a policy brief for the Center for Oral Health in California. And that is basically an organization that works with California schools to ensure that all children have low cost dental care. And it's actually the cool thing about them is that it's actually using existing programs. So it doesn't really cost um, the state that much more to leverage the existing programs. And it's a just for like very low cost. There's obviously dental care is really important, and a lot of kids don't get dental care early on, and that can be really terrible. But if kids can get access to things like dental sealants and stuff, that prevents cavities from forming, and that improves their performance at school. It improves their attendance because they go to school more and they have dentist visits less, and their parents don't have to take them to the dentist and all this good stuff. So thanks to that white paper, that the policy brief that I wrote with them for them, and I'll link that in the description box also. It actually has my name on it as a credited person, which is amazing because I don't get a lot of credit for my work as a ghostwriter, and I've been a lot of different people. So that's something I worked on. I also have been working on for Arizona Democrats. I always talk about my political things I'm doing here. I talked about the toxic male narratives and how much I love Nikki Haley. And so anyway, when Joe Biden dropped out of the race and Kamala Harris became the nominee, the candidate, I actually got invited. That was really fun. I've never been in the same room as any presidential candidates, I don't think. I once saw Joe Lieberman outside at Georgetown, RIP Joe Lieberman, but I don't think he was a vice presidential candidate. But yeah, I went to the Obama inauguration, and I actually had tickets to Donald Trump's inauguration, but I never went for various reasons when I was interning in the House. But it was really fun. So, and then what else did I do? I worked really hard this summer because I knew I would be busy this fall. I actually wrote two journal articles. One I wrote about PTSD in journalism, and another one I wrote my graduate work, Family History of Alcoholism. So in graduate school, I did a lot of things looking at brain structure because when I worked at Massachusetts General Hospital, I learned this technique called voxel-based morphometry. And basically, it's a way to measure thicknesses and sizes of different volumes of different brain regions, gray matter regions, so like brain cells. So I became like a pro at voxel-based morphometry, like using it to analyze data. And so I actually trained my colleagues on it when I worked at Georgetown. So yeah, I have to say it's like a lot different working on research papers outside of the lab because in lab you have a dedicated office, you go there every day. The hardest part about working on my papers as an independent scientist was finding a quiet place to work because coffee shops aren't really quiet anymore, but I don't want them to be quiet because I like to go to coffee shops to drink coffee and like chat with people. I so I went to the library, our local university library, and I worked there. So, um, so yeah, and I didn't think it would get done, but actually my collaborator did most of the work on that because she's actually a published author on this specific topic. It's a long story as to, well, it is and isn't a long story as it's publishing outside of academia. But basically, back in the day when I was in graduate school, I met different people working on my research topic at the Society for Neuroscience conference, and I followed their work and I reached out to one of them, like literally just someone whose poster I stopped by. And I was like, hey, do you want to write a paper together? And she actually said yes. And for 4 years, we just sat on this project as COVID took over the whole world. But now we had more time. So we were like, let's get this done by September. And so we got the paper done, we submitted it. So we'll see if it gets published. But it's the findings are really interesting. And then the other research I kind of just created from my own experiences. I'm an independent scientist with Seeds of Science. My research interests in that are looking at science out in the real world, because we always do science in a lab. So once when I was giving a talk about PTSD at like the medical museum in Silver Spring, Maryland, after the talk, this veteran walked up to me and was like, PTSD isn't really like that in the real world. And like part of his comment was kind of mean, like, you don't know what you're talking about, Missy. But then the other part was like, this research in the lab is not fully taking into account all of the variables that happen in the real world. So then I got really interested. After I left graduate school and left academia, I was like, there's a lot of space for science to be part of the real world. Like, as someone that studies PTSD, I guess you just never stop thinking about PTSD and trauma your whole life, because I feel like ever since I left graduate school, I thought I could just say, like, I used to be a scientist, but I cannot say that because my knowledge of the brain shapes my interests and like everything. And I can't just say that those 7 years of my life didn't happen. So I decided, what the heck, I'm going to be an independent researcher. And my paper is going to be in review soon, and I hope it's published. It's a paper that merges. It's like a journalism style. It has a journalism style interview format, but it also has scientific evidence, and it's actually in some ways a very in-depth review of what we know about trauma and in an underexamined area, which is journalism, because we're in two wars right now. And every day we see all of these horrific images and that come from people that actually took them for us. And those people actually have a very high risk of PTSD, like the same risk as combat veterans. And combat veterans actively fight in a war, and photojournalists just go there and observe it. So I think that really tells you a lot. In journalism, there's very little research on PTSD for whatever reason. Maybe it's hard to find funding. It's hard to justify why we should care about journalists specifically. A lot of this research is done as part of the VA's research programs on PTSD, looking at veterans. Like you can get like 1 million veterans from all the VA's different areas, but journalists, it's just, even when I proposed this paper idea, they were like, why is it interesting to study PTSD in journalists? And to me, I was like, well, from a scientific perspective, it's really important to study PTSD in journalists, because you have to, if you want to understand PTSD on the level of the brain, you have to understand it on several. One lens is like looking at PTSD, not just in like vet combat populations or people that have experienced interpersonal violence. That's another common one, or maybe like natural disaster survivors. A lot of times people get PTSD from things that you wouldn't think cause PTSD. Like some ways that I've met weirdly a lot of people diagnosed with PTSD, and you can get it from, and I think this is something people don't know, it's kind of like secondhand smoke. You can get it from experiences that other people have had that you're kind of like hearing about. And that's known as secondhand trauma. So in my paper, basically, I talk about the news ecosystem having 3 different like phases. So in the first phase, there's news gathering. And obviously, the news gathering process happens thanks to journalists. And then after the news is gathered, it's then reported by the journalist, and maybe the journalist works with like a team of editors, of managers, people that are in the journalism world, and they all sort through the different horrific events, natural disasters, war, you name it, all kinds of stuff. And then actually the traumatic content is passed on to the general public as well, because they read the news. So yeah, so basically, I was telling you about the dimensions of PTSD. So there's the dimension of looking at the brain, looking at PTSD not just as like this thing that only veterans get, but looking at it process that can happen with many different types of traumas, and looking at the effects of those different traumas, and looking at the mark that those traumas have in the brain to create biotypes of PTSD. And so, like, I talk about this in my paper, and I have to probably wait until the paper comes out to tell you more about the biotypes of PTSD, but I basically argue that journalist PTSD may be a distinct biotype, or it even may be similar to other biotypes such as combat associated PTSD. So there's a lot to say about that, and I think that if you've read The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk, you'll know that actually trauma plays a very underappreciated role in our carceral system. A lot of the people that have adverse childhood experiences that go to jail interface with the traumatizing legal system. Basically, re-traumatizes people already suffering from adverse life experiences. You can say that about a lot of different settings. You can say that about education. Looking at the role of these bad experiences, people don't reflect on their bad experiences. So journalists especially don't. There's a lot more I could say about this, but you'll just have to wait until my paper comes out, because it's going to be a good paper. It's peer reviewed. It incorporates a lot of different things: organizational management of newsrooms, journalism as an enterprise, journalism, mental health, obviously neuroscience. So I'm really excited about it, and I can't wait to share that with you. Let me look through my list of things I was going to tell you today. I think that's basically all I've been up to this summer. Oh yeah, summer's over. I'm back to being a sub, volunteering for the Arizona Democrats, and I've already written all the content for Fancy Comma's blogs for until November 5th. So we probably won't be online that much until then. We are still working on client work right now, but in our economic times that continue to be a bit uncertain, we're kind of trying to lay low, but we're having fun. I hope to update you more on my different papers and everything we're working on. I hope you're having a great summer. Thanks for watching this video. If you liked it, make sure to subscribe and also share this video with your friends. Have a wonderful day.